Okay. Hello, Dr. Mizanur.
Yeah, hi. Sorry for the delay because I was just coming back from the campus of my college because I was in a meeting. The meeting went a little bit longer, so it took some time to come back and join the session.
It's all right, sir. Still can make it on time.
Right, no problem.
Okay. Let's start the session, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, so we can start immediately, so no issues at all.
All right. So, hello again, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final session of the guest lecture with Dr. Mizanur Rahaman, an associate professor from the American University of Iraq, Baghdad, who will share his expertise and knowledge about development as human rights with a specific focus on contemporary issues and challenges. Last night, Dr. Mizanur already explained about the current practices on development as human rights. He said that human rights are in a constant state of evolution as the world undergoes changes. A planned development can sometimes lead to challenges, but unplanned development can also create problems. Both have their own set issues to contend with. As we are aware, there are three generations of human rights, and it's possible for different states to have varying perspectives on human rights, influenced by their unique circumstances and conditions. It is also important for us to remember that UN RDR UN is a document that are the result of negotiations on paragraph by a paragraph basis. Therefore, it's understandable if certain aspects remain open to debate, including legal considerations, the interpretation of rights, and the substance of those rights. In non-Western countries, the concept of human rights often involves a development from below, emphasizing grassroots-driven progress. It's obviously different with the Western countries. Despite the acknowledged weaknesses and uncertainties within the UN Declaration on the Right of Development, UNDRD, it is still essential to recognize and appreciate the document as a symbol of the collective commitment of global states to safeguard both human rights and development simultaneously. It underscores the shared concern for the welfare and progress of all individuals and communities worldwide. It is also a shared challenges for us to harmonize the international aspirations with the development interests that are genuinely felt by each nation at the national level. Let us collectively oversee the process to ensure its implementation aligns with the philosophical goals we aim to achieve together. So that is summary from last session, and today we will move to the final session, the most important and interesting things, like promising by Dr. Mizanur last night about contemporary issues and challenges. We can see the hazard and perhaps the solution that Dr. Mizanur offered to us in order to protect and improve the human rights as development. So without any further ado, Dr. Mizanur, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Annisa. I think there was some problem with the connection, but I just got back. Um,
Yes, sir, we can hear you and we can see you.
right, okay. Yes, I'm opening the PPT. So right. So I hope that all of you can see my screen. I've just shared. So today we're going to discuss about the contemporary challenges as well as issues that we face in terms of thinking about, in terms of implementation, in terms of understanding the development as human right, or you can say the right to development as a human right, or probably you can also say that human right to development, right? So in the first session, I have kind of discussed the historical context, how actually the right emerged in the international human rights scene or human rights arena. And in the second session, I tried to kind of reveal, I tried to kind of show how actually the very idea of development is practiced at the international level. So my focus was mainly how international organizations, how different organs of the UN actually understand that what is the meaning and the substance of development as a human right or the right to development as declared in the Declaration on the Right to Development. I tried to kind of emphasize that there's a that the very definition of development, the very idea of development as human right is a fluid concept. Means, and despite having a very broader understanding or not having any specific meaning or definition of what does development mean, um, the international level, the very idea of development as a human right gained a lot of interest, a lot of traction, also a lot of debate or controversies. Um, so we looked into that how the how at the international level the very idea of development has been implemented or kind of promoted through different mechanisms, through different means, through different conferences, working groups, then consultation groups at the global level, also at the regional level. I have briefly pointed out that the Declaration on the Right to Development is a non-binding legal document, and therefore, what the question arises: how can we actually speak, or how can we actually say that there is a right to development, or how can we justify that development is a human right? So, so the Declaration on the Right to Development is not really not really a treaty, or it does not has the equal status of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the UN Charter, or the two covenants that are binding on governments or the binding on or imposes some kind of responsibility or some kind of obligations at the international level or different actors functioning or operating at the international level. And they can be held responsible if there is a violation of those rights mentioned in the two covenants. So I have tried to point it out that um, the status of the Declaration on the Right to Development somewhat remains in a state of flux. However, I tried to kind of link or try to kind of reveal that although the declaration is not a binding document, we can get some support or we can make a connection between the declaration and the UN Charter, or with a very specific provision in the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Now, what exactly the issues that we are facing for the last 30 or 40 years? So if we simply accept that, I mean, more formal recognition or more formal articulation of the right to development, then that is the year 1986, when the declaration was adopted at the UN General Assembly. And in the last 30 or 40 years, we have observed a lot of changes, a lot of developments, a lot of exploration, as well as explanation of the meaning and the substance of of the right to development. However, what we still face today, or what we are observing in the past 30 or 40 years, is actually um, some debatable issues, and that is exactly the meaning or the substance of the right to development. Now, what exactly this issue, what exactly the debate about the meaning and substance? And I have here a kind of try to summarize rather than going into all the details of the debate, all the details about the arguments and counter arguments. What we find is that the scholarly debate regarding the meaning and the substance of the right to development, or the human right to development, is still continues even today. So on the one hand, we find scholars. So the issue that we are facing, one of the most important issue, is exactly what is the nature and the substance? How do we define the meaning or the substance of the right to development? How do we actually understand what does development as human right means? So I have tried to summarize the arguments here. On the one hand, we find Mohammed Bedzawi and Abisab. So both were very renowned, very well-known, famous judges of the International Court of Justice, and they worked for a long time at the UN. According to them, right to development is a necessary condition for the achievement of all other human rights, or an enabling right that actually makes other human rights possible, or other human rights meaningful, or other human rights realizable. So it is a composite concept. So right to development is a broad, all-encompassing composite concept that can actually help to realize all other human rights. So what does it mean if I put it slightly differently? Um, uh, if we are able to realize, if we are able to implement the right to development, then you can say that other human rights which are prescribed or kind of recognized in the UN Charter or the UDHR or the two covenants, even further, many other international human rights documents, then we can say for a surety that, or we can kind of say for concretely that the right to development of the human rights of individuals or communities have actually been achieved or realized. However, on the other hand, what we find is that another very prominent, very well-known human rights activist, human rights scholar, is that Isha Shivji, a Tanzanian legal scholar and human rights a scholar. He said that right to development is grounded on an illusory model of cooperation and solidarity. So according to him, what we are talking or discussing about the right to development or development as a human right is a kind of is an illusory promise that can never be achieved. Not only that, he also pointed out this is a very dangerous to talk about the right to development, because by talking about right to development and all-encompassing right, we are simply ignoring the other human rights that have already been recognized in other countries. Or another scholar have argued the right to development is little more than a rhetorical exercise that permits the third world to distort human rights by linking it to the utopian aspiration for a new international economic order. So what this particular scholar is trying to say or argue, that by linking human rights to some kind of utopian new international economic order, which I discussed in the first session, we're actually, which is not achievable, which we have never achieved, which never gained any traction at the international level. We are making human rights or the very idea of development as a human right as an utopian ideal that can never be achieved. There are still others who point out um, that the right to development is too woolly and does not easily invite the degree of commitment that one expects unequivocally in support of an inescapable conclusion. So it is aspirational, it is too broad. It doesn't really, the right to development doesn't really impose any kind of obligation, any kind of commitment on the government or on the international community or international institutions. And therefore, what exactly the meaning or substance of the right that we are designating or kind of describing as a human right? And there is some purchase, some value of this kind of argument, because ultimately the right to a development or the declaration of the right to development is a non-binding document. And so ultimately this document doesn't really impose any obligation or any commitment on the countries, on the states, on the governments, or even international community or international organizations. So the precise meaning or the substance of the meaning of the meaning and of the right to development is actually remains in a flux. However, one can also think about right to development as not exactly a declaration of new rights or any new rights. We can say, or we can defend that declaration of the right to development is not really something new. We haven't actually declared anything, any new right, but rather a juridical technique that is simply employed in terms of carrying out or in terms of recognizing the struggle of third world people or the struggle of those marginalized, those affected people whose rights, whose displacements or marginalization is simply ignored or simply cannot be fit, or we cannot fit those struggle, we cannot really fit those marginalization within the meaning of other human rights documents. So we can say that it is more of a specific declaration of a right that can help us to actually concretely identify what exactly we need to realize, what exactly we need to implement, and what exactly we need to do in terms of making human rights a reality. So these are some of the, one of the issue is a definitional issue, or the, in terms of identifying, in terms of debate regarding what exactly the meaning of the right to development. So here I have pointed out again a kind of definitional fluidity, means it's a fluid definition, an open definition that is provided in the UN Declaration on the Right to Development. And obviously, once the definition is broad, it provides a lot of flexibility to countries or different governments to actually set its own standard, own criteria, own policies in terms of making the right to development a reality. As one writer puts it, the UNDRD did not, and rightly so, draw a very definite picture of what development is. What is at stake here is the equal opportunity to develop, not an equal or identical development. So what does it mean is that the very definition of the meaning of right to development provided in the UN declaration is actually remains open. So every state, every country can actually decide what level of development, what is more important, what is more, what can be the more priority, what is the, and the what the government actually want to prioritize in terms of implementing, in terms of defining what kind of development a country wants, what kind of development people or community actually wants to achieve. Another feature of the definition is that it underscores a multidimensional nature of development in its economic, social, cultural, or political context. So that also remains open for countries, for governments, international organizations, in order to actually shape, in order to actually define what development means in a particular context. what development can be achievable at a particular level of economic or social context or social progress. Now, this generality of the definition also allows for inclusion of new concepts and also inclusion of a new or other related concepts. So once the definition remains open, once the definition is not concrete, not exact definition, that also gives countries or governments to actually define or bring new understanding or new concepts within the purview of the right to development. And that's what we find is that um, the very idea of sustainable development, the very idea of millennium and development goals, the very idea of the protection of future generations within the meaning of sustainable development, as well as the relationship between human rights, democracy. All these concepts all these linkages can actually be brought or can be brought within the meaning of the right to development. So despite having or in spite of all those debates or criticisms, we can still think of the right to development as a broad concept, as a flexible, a fluid concept where each country, each government can actually shape or can actually decide or define what development means for them and what development the government or the state or the people or the community can actually wants to achieve, what is realizable in a particular context and what cannot be realized. So the flexibility of the definition actually provides some um, um, openness or kind of some or you can say it opens a door for countries or governments or states to actually decide or define and prioritize in terms of making development policies, in terms of following what kind of development it wants to achieve in practice, in terms of making more realizable development and outcome. So these kind of flexibility actually remains. However, my point here is that just to highlight what issues and debates we are actually having, or what exactly the critical issues that we are facing in the, or we have faced, or is still facing in the last 30 or 40 years since the right to development became or formally articulated in the UN declaration. So that is one of the issue we are still dealing with. We're still trying to figure out. We're still trying to kind of come to a conclusion or come to an agreement what should be the meaning and the substance of development. However, the complex and the open-ended nature of the definition of development does also pose some problems. And what are those problems? In particular, it makes difficult to identify the exact substance of the right. What exactly we want to achieve? Is it social development? Is it economic development? Is it a cultural development? And even if we simply say that social development, what is the meaning of social development? What does the meaning of social in the context of development? What does political mean in the context of development? As well as the scope of responsibilities for the fulfillment of those rights. So who exactly will fulfill those rights in the sense that who actually has the responsibility or obligation to fulfill those rights. So those are problems again, that the definition is open. There is no exact uh, uh, um, understanding or definition of who has the responsibility, who has the obligation, although the declaration says the responsibility remains with the people, with the government at the national level, with the international community or states at the international level. However, we do not find any specific concrete obligation or responsibility that we can say that in case of failure of development or in case of development hazard, someone is responsible or someone is actually accountable for the failure or for the development hazard. So what does it mean is that it remains difficult to actually impose an obligation. it remains actually difficult to hold someone accountable. So that are the problems. So what I kind of bring out from this understanding is that a difficulty in understanding the substance of the concept of development has rightly been articulated by Gilbert Rist, and he wrote an interesting book on the history of development. And in the book, he argues that the extent of development discourse comes from its power to seduce in every sense of the term, to charm, to please, to fascinate, to say dreaming, but also to abuse, to turn away from the truth, to deceive. How dare one think at the same time that the cure might worsen the ill which he wishes to combat? So, what exactly he's trying to say is that the fascination or our fascination with development, the way we dream development. So it is a dream that we always want to develop. We want economic growth. We always try to imitate that a particular as a citizen, as a population, as a particular country, we want to develop like others. We want to develop like another country. Development also seduce whenever it comes to a government discourse or the development discourse that a particular development project will bring economic growth, employment, jobs, more income, ultimately a national development. So the power of seduction from from the very word development. So whenever it comes to the development discourse, whenever it comes to talking about development, we become fascinated with the idea because it gives us a dream, a hope that we want to develop. We want to bring development in a particular country. We want to develop like others. Now, at the same time, this very way of dreaming development, this very fascination with the idea of development also hides the truth, hides the reality that the cure, that if we understand development as a cure to underdevelopment, development is a cure to maldevelopment, then this cure actually sometimes brings more harm or creates more harm, but actually makes us worse. So that the cure might worsen the ill. So if underdevelopment is a ill, if the violation of human rights is an ill, if the right to development is something which cannot be achieved, then the very idea of development brings that hope, brings that a kind of dream that we want to achieve. However, sometimes the development discourse or the discourse of human rights as a development sometimes hides the reality, hides the ill actually. And in fact, in many cases, this discourse of human rights as a development or development as a human rights discourse actually worsens the ill, worsens the disease that we are trying to cure, that we are trying to kind of come out. So that's how he understands that what exactly happens in the debate that we are having. On the one hand, human rights to development, on the other hand, the development hazards that actually come with this very idea of development as a human right. Now, development hazards. Since I kind of I'm trying, or kind of I thought that it would be more interesting if I bring this idea that or bring into discussion how this very idea of dreaming development, the very idea of fulfilling or realizing the right to development as a human right, also kind of worsens the situation or brings more hazards in curing the ill or in curing the disease that we are having, or in terms of curing the situation of underdevelopment or maldevelopment that we are kind of experiencing for the past 50 or 60 years or for a long time, specifically in developing countries. And there are many contexts, there are many stories that can be told in terms of how development becomes an ill and how the failure of development actually worsens the situation, worsens the disease or the illness that we are trying to cure through the discourse of development as a human right. And many examples can be provided. However, in the constraint of time, because you only have around 1.5 hours or 90 minutes, it is not really possible to include all the examples or all the stories or the events within our discussion. So I have chosen mainly to focus on issues of displacement that comes with development projects or the wishful or the dream projects or development projects that we imagined or that we kind of prioritized or that we framed or planned in for people, for communities in terms of bringing more growth, more progress, in terms of creating employment jobs. So I mainly focus my discussion only on development hazards that comes with development projects, especially construction of dams or certain projects that are kind of intended to actually benefit people, and how those projects actually failed or actually worsens the situation of those communities or people for whom the development project been calculated that over 110 million people are displaced worldwide. And that is the total, a round of a figure about displacement. And within this figure, you can also include the different types of displacement. So displacement can actually occur from different contexts, different situations, from and different events. And those events are mainly, conflict, war, rebellion, disasters, natural calamities, development related and or development induced displacements. So the term displacement is a very broad term, and displacement can happen actually because of many reasons. Now, when we come to understand, when we try to find out the exact number of people displaced because of development-related projects, we do not have any exact number. We are unable to find any exact number. However, it can be said that a large number, or probably you can say millions of people, are actually become displaced uh, or fall within the cycle of forced displacement and relocation in two sectors. So out of 110 million, you can also you can say that at least few millions people almost every year fall within the cycle of development related or development induced displacements. And mainly these development-related displacements happen or occur within the dam construction or urban transportation or urban rehabilitation. Sometimes in many countries, in many large cities, specifically if you think about a city like Jakarta, which for the past few years actually kind of experiencing um, high sea level, and the Indonesian government are actually, working on a plan for the past few years to whether the capital city can be relocated to another place, somewhere which is far beyond Jakarta. If some of you might be familiar, and some of you might be, might be aware of the Indonesian government's, new plan to relocate the capital city of Jakarta to another island. Now that is obviously kind of a regeneration plan, a regeneration through development. And once the Indonesian government thinks about relocating the capital city to another island, a remote island, where probably very limited number of population actually, lives there. Obviously, the government needs to actually develop that island first, in order, because shifting the capital city to another island is a huge task, and that requires proper infrastructure development in that island in the initial stage, so that all the government functionaries, government departments, all other facilities, or all other, transport system, everything, or even the population can be actually relocated or shifted to that place. So, which obviously means, first of all, developing that island and then shifting the capital city to that place when it is suitable for making that shift. So generally, this kind of, this development induced displacement occur in terms of, construction projects, large construction projects, whether that is a dam or any other infrastructure, and also urban regeneration by shifting or kind of relocating certain industries or population or even government departments to another location. Mostly, these development induced displacements are caused by large scale projects, such as, natural resource extraction. So mining sector is another area where displacement and large, mining projects can actually lead to the displacement of a large number of population. Urban renewal or regeneration, as I said, or development programs, industrial parks where, government wants to, create or, construct an industrial hub where most of the industries will be located. Infrastructure projects such as, highways, bridges, irrigation canals, dams. So these are some of the largest scale development projects that actually kind of lead to the displacement of a large number of people. Now, what development-induced displacement suggests is that the effect of development policies and projects. So what the displacement created or caused by large-scale projects actually reveal is the negative side, the effects of these development projects. Such a situation is referred as development hazards, where development negatively affects the development beneficiaries. So that is one of the questions, one of the issue, one of the challenges we are dealing with in the context of development, or more specifically in the context of development as human rights. So who exactly the right holder, who exactly the development beneficiary within the meaning of the Declaration of the Right to Development? And I have pointed out that it is the people, the individual, the community who are the beneficiaries of development, and therefore they are the right holder in terms of understanding the development as a human right. Now, what happens is that, or we can pose a question, is that whether the right to development, given its content, international recognition, and positive status, as we have identified in the declaration, in somewhat making a link with the UN Charter, with other binding human rights documents, such as the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Can we then argue that in these cases of, development hazards, or in these cases of large development projects where or which actually cause a massive human displacement, or which actually lead to a large scale displacement of the population, be employed? Can we deploy this right or development as a human right or right to development, simply because that there are right holders? Those development projects are actually initiated or planned for certain community, certain population, and therefore they are the development beneficiary. And therefore, when these development hazards actually occur, can we deploy the right to development, the very idea of development as a human right, and then argue that actually, what we are experiencing here, or the kind of development hazards we are observing, is actually a violation of the right to development, or actually is a violation of the human right to developers. That's the question, or that remains the main challenge in the discourse of development as a human right. So, and that is a challenge I will try to kind of unpack. That is a challenge I want to reveal or kind of highlight, that where exactly we stand today, what kind of debate we are having regarding the deployment of the very idea of right to development, or development as human rights, in the context of development hazards that we have observed, or even observing almost all corners of the world, almost in every country. And I will kind of discuss three examples, or probably kind of four examples, two from India, one from Thailand, and one from Bangladesh. I was thinking to also include some examples from Indonesia, which I am familiar, I am aware of those projects, or what kind of displacements that actually happened in case of those development projects in Indonesia. However, the constraint of time and the constraint of space actually kind of limited me, or put a limit on me to include all those examples. So in economic literature, first I'm giving a kind of brief context, or a brief outline where exactly we are starting, from where exactly we can start, and how we move to a particular discussion where development as a human right can be defined, or is described as an entitlement, or as a form of legal right, and therefore can we deploy this particular right in the context of development as hazards. So in economic literature, development is viewed in terms of economic development. And accordingly, economic growth is used as a way of measuring development process. So I have probably highlighted, or kind of pointed out before, that generally, from an economist point of view, the way we understand development is that it is simply an economic growth, economic progress, in terms of increasing income, increasing employment, increasing jobs, increasing infrastructure, increasing GDP of a particular country. Okay, so that is how we look into, or that is a tendency that we find in economic literature, or from economist point of view, that development is all about economic growth, economic progress, economic development. And the point I want to make here, that there is no objection to viewing economic growth as a necessary instrument, or a necessary mechanism, necessary idea to actually combat poverty. We obviously need economic growth. We obviously need economic development. However, in developing countries, the exclusive focus on economic growth actually led to some kind of understanding, or some kind of some form of idea that especially in the southern continent, southern countries, that when to expect and implicate economic growth strategies as a basis of the approach to development. So the very idea that is proposed by the economist, or or in economic literature, that we only need economic development, we only need economic progress, and if we can achieve economic growth, economic development, like in the form of greater life expectancy, healthier life, or healthier children, more food, more production, more material progress, more infrastructure, good shelter, adequate shelter, better facilities, amenities, and therefore we have achieved development. That is the idea that comes from the mainstream economic thinking, or mainstream economic literature. And this idea, this exclusive focus on economic growth in certain countries, or in countries of the South, actually to accept this idea or to kind of implicate economic growth, exclusive focus on economic growth, kind of became a basis or kind of became the main foundation to approach development. So that is the main foundation we accept or kind of accepted in almost all countries, and kind of pushed or kind of forced southern countries to actually accept economic growth as a basis or the main focus of development. Now, having said that, having kind of outlined the foundational ideas of development or economic growth, there are two aspects, there are two sides, there are two important, perspectives that I kind of want to kind of bring here, want to kind of inform, want to kind of point out very briefly, although they are very complex ideas, complex concepts. So some authors actually talked about or kind of highlighted or discussed that when you're talking about, we cannot simply talk about economic growth, economic progress, or economic development, but rather we obviously need economic growth. We obviously need economic development. However, within this very discussion of economic growth or economic development, we also need to think about development ethics or the ethics of development. Now, the argument goes that while it is undeniable that economic growth provides the most efficient solution to alleviate domestic problems or national problems, even community problems, experience reveals that it cannot really give the development beneficiary greater control over development unless this process ensures inclusion of the development beneficiaries. So simply having or simply talking about or simply implementing the very idea of development as economic growth or economic development does not really bring the intended benefit or doesn't really bring the intended outcome for those beneficiaries unless they are included within the development process. And that is where the declaration comes into play, that in the declaration, development has been described as a process, as a social process or economic process or a development process where the beneficiaries need to be included. So unless the people or the community for whom the development has been planned or promoted or initiated, unless they are included in the process, unless the outcome of the development project is beneficial for them, then we cannot really say for sure that we have actually achieved development. We might achieve economic growth, we might achieve economic development, but we cannot really say for sure that from a point of view of ethics of development that we have actually achieved development. Now, here I kind of, one, very well-known development scholar, he argues that a development ethic is necessary to ensure that painful changes launched under the banners of development do not result in anti-development, which destroys culture and individuals and exacts undue sacrifices in suffering and societal well-being, all in the name of profit, some absolutized ideology or a supposed inefficiency imperative. So I hope that it brings the very argument I'm trying to making, that the banner of development that we are promoting, the banners of development that in some countries, government or states or international organizations, even developed country governments sometimes promote or sometimes highlight, can actually bring anti-development, and that can actually destroy culture, that can help, that can destroy the livelihoods, the source of income, the productive resources of the people, of the community. So what does it mean is that, therefore, within the very idea or the very discussion of economic growth or economic progress, we need to bring some kind of development ethic. Similarly, Amartya Sen, probably some of you heard his name, a very well-known Nobel laureate in economics, and welfare economist, warns of the danger of overemphasizing economic growth. He relates development with the capability of the development beneficiary. So according to him, it is not simply economic growth, economic progress, but rather the capability, more about the choices, more about the creating more options, or increasing the capacity or the capability of those for whom the development project or development actually kind of planned. The capability approach provides an alternative to crude measures of development through indicators of growth that fall that fail to adequately establish the quality of life of those for whom development initiatives are most crucial. So what he actually trying to suggest is that we need to have an alternative mechanism, an alternative idea, an alternative thinking of development that that does not simply promote, does not simply rely on the mainstream argument of economic progress or mainstream argument of or mainstream thinking of economic development. Okay, and for him, that alternative is increasing the capability of people so that people can make their own choices, own decision, own ideas of and development. And according to this approach, the capability approach, development is a process of expanding the capabilities of people to be able to do what they actually want to do, what they actually want to achieve. And therefore, in terms of the capability approach, development simply means providing choices and options so that people can actually increase their capabilities of decision making, increase their capabilities of participation, increase their capabilities of deciding what is best for them, what is good for them, and what they actually want from a development project, what kind of development they actually want. And this increasing this capability is actually a form of development, a human development. And just I just want to kind of point it out here that this very idea of expanding capabilities or the capability approach is the foundation of the UN organ, the United Nations Development Programs, which I kind of mentioned briefly, I think yesterday. So this the UNDP, in short, the United Nations Development Program, produces an annual report called the Human Development Report, and this report is kind of published, I think, from the 1975 or 1976. So the last 30 or 40 years, and more than almost 40 years, this UN organ, the UNDP, is actually producing this human development report, and this human development report is actually based on the very idea of development as capability, expanding capabilities. And therefore, the UN, specifically the UNDP, actually abandoned, stopped using the criteria of economic growth or economic development as a measure of development. Rather, it emphasizes an alternative idea of development, and that is the expanding capabilities of the people, of the community or the individual. At the practical level, the capability approach is dependent on political action. So expanding capabilities does not happen just on its own. It depends on political actions, political activities, in the sense that political actors, the political process must create a condition for enhancing the quality of life of the development beneficiary. So ultimately, the very understanding or very process of expanding the capability of the people actually depend on the political establishments, means the government, the state, and the other actors, I mean, national or international actors, to create a condition where individuals or where development beneficiaries can actually, expand their capabilities, actually create their own capabilities. Thus, the goal of the political process should be set the stage and allow people to present whatever arguments they have in favor of a given choice. The political process, in a particular country, the political establishments, the political action from the side of government, from the side of development policymakers, from the side of development planners, is actually to create a condition where a choice is given to the development beneficiaries or to those people whose rights are affected, whose lives are affected, so that they can make an informed decision about the development projects, about what kind of development is beneficial for them, what kind of development they actually want. However, to exercise the capabilities and expand their choice in life, one would obviously need to access the resources based on legitimate claims, and that's where um, the very argument I made yesterday is development as a legal resource and development as a political instrument. So what we need then is some kind of legal basis where um, the the claim for development, the very idea of expanding capabilities can be based on a legal foundation, where if those capabilities, if those choices, if those entitlements are not provided, the development beneficiaries can actually claim that we have the legal right, we have a legal entitlement, and that is the right to development. So to some way, then the language of the capabilities approach is actually somehow relates with the idea of development as a human right, or the idea of development or the right to development. And if we look into in this way, then the two ideas, the capabilities approach, expanding the capabilities of the people, then obviously kind of brings us close to the very idea of development as a right. Because if we understand development as a capability, as a form of entitlement, then the development beneficiaries can actually claim that we have a right to expand our capabilities. We have a right to a condition. We have a right to an environment where we can expand our capabilities, especially since the language of rights entails legal protection and can be used as a base for political action. So if the state, the development practitioners, development authorities, planners fail to create that condition, then the development beneficiaries can actually point out or can actually argue that we have a right to actually expect uh, this kind of facilities. We have a right to a condition where we can expand our capabilities. Now, the language of rights may provide a legal and a political basis in respect of a notion of development towards which the capability approach contributes. So capability approach can contribute only if we create a legal basis, if we recognize that there is a legal basis, there's a legal right that can actually can be claimed by people, by communities. Now, there are two other aspects I want to point out before I move to discuss those development hazards, because these capabilities and expanding capabilities, development as entitlements or as a human right is important in terms of assessing those events, assessing those development projects, or in terms of understanding those development hazards, whether we can actually argue that, or we can actually try to kind of find out that whether these development projects actually expanded the capabilities of the people, whether these development projects actually created a condition where the development beneficiaries actually expanded their choices, whether these projects actually expanded the choices or brought any beneficial outcome for the people, for the community. Another important aspect we discuss, or scholars actually discuss, is that development interest. So in any development project, there are multiple interests. So people, community, for whom the project has been planned or initiated have a particular interest. Government, state authorities, those who are handling or kind of initiating the development project, they have a particular vision, particular interest, particular ideas about development. Then international partners, organizations, those who are providing the funding or kind of supporting the development project, the national or state development projects, they also have a very specific interest, a specific vision about the very idea of development. And what we find is that in most development projects, some development interest is prioritized while other development interests are kind of neglected or kind of ignored. We can also talk about that entitlement position. So whenever we find in a particular development project different types of interest, development interests are interacting with each other, sometimes they come into conflict. One interest can come into conflict with another interest. So for example, a government or a state might think about a development project in terms of economic profit, in terms of economic progress, in terms of developing more infrastructure that will ultimately contribute to the development of the economy of the country. But the communities, those who are affected by those projects, can actually have a very different interest. They only think about how that project is going to bring benefits for them, how beneficial the project for them is, whether they were, whether their concerns, their interests, their ideas of development have been taken into account, have been considered in terms of planning the project, in terms of implementing the project. So what we see is that sometimes these development interests, they come into conflict with each other. They're conflicting interests in a particular development project. And therefore, if we talk development, if we think about development as an entitlement, and which is defined as a structurally protected basis for claims. So if we define in terms of the Declaration of the Right to Development or development as a human right, then it is an entitlement. So whenever there is a conflict of interest, the interest of those who are affected, the interest of those which are more important in terms of how the project is going to affect them, how the project is going to affect their rights, their entitlements, their right to participation, a participatory form of decision making, then obviously that these communities, these people can actually think about themselves as right holders, as entitlement holders. And therefore, whenever there's a conflict, or there's a conflict of interest, or conflict of development interest, they can immediately point out that our interest should be prioritized because we are the right holders. We have the entitlement. We are entitled to the development process. So right holders can use the human rights language, human rights principles to justify their claims, and can also be protected if their rights are not respected, if their rights are not protected, if their rights are not observed in terms of framing, in terms of planning development projects. So with regard to the effect of development policy, the focus is on the outcomes of the development policy. Assessing the outcomes of development policy is believed to represent the nature of development interest. So what kind of outcome is expected from a development project depends on what interest has been prioritized by the project planners or by the government or by the international organizations. And if we simply try to understand which interest has been prioritized and which interest has been ignored or neglected, then we can immediately identify who are the beneficiary of that development. Is the beneficiary mainly those who are living in the urban areas, or is the development project is only for the people who are going to receive the most of their benefits? And what about the interest of those people who are going to be affected by the development project? So we can immediately understand what kind of interest has been prioritized in a particular development project. Now, this is an example I have kind of want to discuss. is about a Konya Dam in India, a mega development project which produced unanticipated geological changes, such as um, 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 a seismic event or effect. Now, by looking into this particular project, you can immediately say or kind of argue that whose interest was kind of prioritized in terms of planning this development project, in terms of framing or initiating this development project. This dam project has induced an earthquake after the construction. Okay? And this particular seismic event or earthquake was actually killed almost 80 people, injured 1,500 others, and left several thousands homeless. Now, it clearly reveals for whose interest, what kind of interest was prioritized in terms of constructing the dam, and whose interest became more dominant than at the expense of um, others' interest, those who were displaced, those who became homeless, those who became injured because of the project. So obviously, the project led to a natural disaster. Now, focusing on this hazardous outcome, the type of development interest the project was decided upon thus becomes questionable. So we can immediately question whose interest was actually prioritized in this kind of project, which actually led to a natural disaster and therefore made people homeless, people injured. So this kind of project actually reveals um, uh, what interest take priorities, what interest is prioritized in terms of development projects. Is it the interest of the people who are living nearby, who are living around the project, or who actually lived in the or who was whose livelihood, whose land was taken to actually construct the project or to implement the project. So this project obviously was for some kind of economic progress, that because an infrastructure was needed to a dam was needed to produce more electricity, and if more electricity is produced, then obviously that is going to benefit a large number of population in that particular country. And when there's an infrastructure development that and more power, more electricity is generated, then actually is going to contribute to the production of the productive sector, the industrial sector, and therefore that in turn will obviously contribute to the economic development, economic progress. However, you can see from this example, um, there's there were some other interests which were never taken into consideration, never considered, never accepted, or some you could say completely ignored. Now, at this point, one can conclude that development hazards take place when a development process disturbs essential entitlement positions of those involved. So, looking into the example I have just provided, a dam project, where it clearly demonstrates and also reveals that whose entitlement were completely ignored. So, if we understand that development as a human right, or there is a right to development, and which we can define as a legal right or as a legal entitlement which can be claimed, then definitely this kind of projects where a large number of people become homeless or become injured, they can immediately rely or claim their entitlement that their entitlements were violated, their rights were violated. It happens that when development negatively affects the right holders in terms of their legitimate access to resources and their legitimate claims over goods and resources, thus inhibiting their capabilities in life. So obviously, when in this case where a large number of population become homeless or injured, then you can obviously say ultimately this project, which is obviously might be successful or might generate more economic progress, more growth, or might be successful in terms of bringing more economic benefits, ultimately a failure because it actually limited the capabilities or it failed to actually expand the capabilities of those people who were affected by the project. The second example that I kind of want to provide is again from India is a Sardar Sarovar Dam in India. The development hazards occur when development processes disturb the entitlement position of the right holders to the right to development. Okay. So whenever a project that actually hampers, that completely ignores, that completely neglects the right holders, the entitlement aspect of a particular development project or entitlement aspects of those people whose life is going to be affected by the project, then that we define as a form of development hazard. So development hazard is not simply a term that we use in terms of a development project which fails to generate economic growth or that fails to provide economic benefit. Obviously, the failure to generate economic benefit, economic profit, or economic progress are obviously important criteria. However, what we understand by development hazards is that only in cases where the rights, the entitlements of those whose life are affected by the project is a form of development hazards. The Sardar Sarovar Dam is one of the dam in the master plan of the Narmada Valley Development Project. It was the largest dam amongst 30 other dams planned in the Narmada River. The dam project was envisaged an irrigation command of 1.8 billion hectares, installed power generation capacity of 1,450 megawatts, and drinking water supply of 8,215 villages and 135 urban areas. So you can see that how, how large, how massive the dam project was. So landlessness, losing land is a productive resource for many people. Many people depend on the productive resource that is land for their livelihood, for their sustenance, for living their life, for generating income, for providing support to their families and children. So the displacement that occurred was mainly about the landlessness or losing their land, a productive resource for many people. That was the main phase of the development hazard that occurred in this project. There were about 22 million inhabitants living in the Narmada River basin, 80% of whom lived in the rural areas, depended primarily on agriculture. During the preparation of the project, appraisals began in the early 1980s. Information over the nature and the scope of the displacement available to people was scant, so there was no clear plan, there was no clear information how many people is going to be displaced because of the project. And for your information, this project was also financed by the World Bank. So World Bank actually financed this project in India. So none of the 26 villages had been given any notice about the planned project. The condition of uncertainty prevailed despite the fact that 8 years before the project was executed, the Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal had elaborately spelled out the provisions for resettlement, assigning government liabilities and responsibilities. So government was a responsible authority. The liability was on the government to provide resettlements, to provide compensation. The victims were living like refugees and relying on water tankers to meet their daily requirement. So there are already people from 22 villages were displaced because of the project. Furthermore, the process of giving compensation for land is observed with the Narmada Human Rights Observer team as violent. So There was no clear plan, no process for giving compensation to the victims of displacement or landlessness. The victims were forced by authorities, namely the police, to sign a compensation list made by the authority. So authorities came up with a list of who were actually displaced or who lost their land, and therefore to sign the document and then kind of settle the dispute. Such uncertainty and inadequacy of compensation brought the people living in the area to action represented by non-governmental organizations. This case was campaigned as a violation of human rights in both the national and at the international level. At the national level, action had been taken in the form of demonstrations and the judicial procedures. Unfortunately, both strategies were rather ineffective. The judgment of the Indian Supreme Court in 2002 was considered favorable to the dam project. The Supreme Court had laid down that the resettlement and rehabilitation has to be done at least 6 months in advance of submersion because when the water is going to be filled in the dam, that might also create a flood. So the project planners, the government authorities must also decide the resettlement plan before the 6 months. Yet it was recognized that the judgment was unlikely to be complied with. So in his first recorded response to the Supreme Court verdict, the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, which is a state in India, kind of stated that one of the main clauses of the award of the Narmada Tribunal is that all project affected people should get land in lieu of land. So whatever land the people lost, they should be given an alternative piece of land. So land for land, that was a decision by the given by the tribunal. However, the main problem is that, according to the minister, is that we do not have any arable land to give to the ousted, since those are ousted from the land. There is no land or no cultivating land to give them. So ultimately, even the court's judgment was never respected. Another unaccommodating response came from the Indian Supreme Court in 2007. This decision of the Supreme Court allowed the continuation of the construction of the project, even though thousands of families have not yet been rehabilitated, and newly 35,000 people are displaced. The only response in favor of the victims found at the national level came from the Indian People's Tribunal on Environment and Human Rights. In a recent report, the panel of the IPT confirmed that the local project, state, and central authorities have been severely negligent and have inflicted a great deal of human and social suffering. Okay? So what this project actually again reveals or demonstrates is a complete a neglect of interest of those people who were affected or who are going to be affected by the project, whose entitlement, whose rights are at stake. So again, here again, it comes the question here. Sorry, the question here arises is that do people have any entitlements in this, or how does ignoring the entitlement dimension or the interest of people actually can lead to a development hazard or a development disaster. Also, here we also need to think about the implementation of the right to development. Is it simply because the right to development has no legal, is a non-binding document, has no legal enforcement mechanism, and therefore it simply remains at the level of a rhetoric, at the level of an utopian ideal. So uh, the debate or the discussion that I kind of pointed out, or the issue with the definition, the issue with the nature or the substance of the meaning of development, the meaning of the development as a human right, again somewhat relates what we find or what we are finding in practice. So is the right to development is simply a rhetoric, as simply something which is an utopian ideal that cannot be achievable, that cannot be realized in actual practice? And what this suggests is that, or brings out from this example of development hazard, is that to some extent those arguments are credible, brings, kind of adds more credibility to those arguments that right to development, or development as a human right, is simply a rhetorical utopian ideal that has no value in terms of implementation, in terms of realizing the right in practice. Or we can also make a connection with what Gilbert Rist said, that the way we are trying to kind of cure a disease, a cure a ill that is under development or non-development, through another development, actually makes the cure worse. So uh, a under development, I mean, curing under development through development projects can sometimes also uh, lead to a more worsening situation. Okay. The second example, or third example, you can say how much time we have. Can anyone, Anisa, can you please tell me how much time we have?
It's already 9 p.m. over here, sir,
Okay,
but
so
it's still okay. 10 minutes more before
okay,
before
okay,
moving to the question.
right, okay. So maybe I'm moving slowly, or maybe I need to speed up a little bit. Okay. Second or third example is the Pakmon Dam project in Thailand. So Pakmon Dam project was constructed and operated by the Electricity Generating Authority of Thailand, is the government authority, on the Moon River and the Mekong River in the northeast Thailand. The Pakmon Dam is presented to provide, again, at one-third a large capacity of electricity or hydropower, irrigation, fisheries. The fish yield is expected to be 100 kilograms per hectare per year to 220 kg per hectares per year. In reality, the project failed to deliver the expected benefits. For the people whose primary income was fishery, the Pakmun Dam has increased their fish catch by, decreased their fish catch by 50 to 10%. The dam has led to the disappearance of many fish species. The total number of households dependent on their income from fisheries in the region around the Moon River has declined from 95.6% to 66.7%. So we can see the project also kind of decreased, or kind of depleted, or kind of damaged the ecological surrounding. People kind of started living or kind of relocating themselves from the nearby, and from the project areas. Their income also decreased. They mainly dependent on fisheries, which started to decrease, and therefore they do not have any other sources to survive, to make income. The loss of income from fisheries became a major cause for concern for the villagers during the construction. And there are two major problems relating to the compensation. First is that the compensation left out the matter of permanent loss of income. So there was a compensation plan. There was no consideration was given for the permanent loss of income, means those who are displaced, those whose income from fishing were lost. So those loss of income was never considered within the compensation plan. While the government acknowledged the impact on fisheries and agreed to compensate eligible households, it was regarded as insufficient. So the compensation was actually, in practice, or in fact, was insufficient for the people who were displaced or who lost their income. The villagers who once depended on fishing as a source of income are still unable to return to their normal, or their regular lifestyle, or the way they have lived before. They were forced to move to urban areas in search of wage labor, or to work in companies or in factories. Unsatisfied with the compensation policies, actions were taken by the victimized people and their representatives, CSO, and in non-governmental organizations. On 25th January 1977, the villagers joined by the 99-day protest in Bangkok, demanding their fair compensations for the permanent loss of their fishing livelihood. As financing agency of the project, the World Bank has declined, consistently refused to take any responsibility for the project's problems, despite the fact the bank was repeatedly warned by local communities and the CSOs prior to approval that the impacts would be severe. So again, you can see one of the problem or the challenge again in the area of development as human right, or the right to development is the enforcement of the right, or who exactly is a duty bearers, who actually is the responsible authority. So here you can see in this project that the World Bank financed the project, and the World Bank completely denied or completely refused to accept the responsibility. So again, this particular issue of enforcement, this particular issue of implementation, this issue of imposing responsibility or obligation is again a challenge, remains a challenge in the area or in the very discussion of the development as human right or the right to development. And we can obviously point out, we can obviously argue that since the declaration is a non-binding legal document, it does not really impose any binding obligation or responsibility on the actors who are responsible for the development hazards, or the state authorities or the government who are somehow also responsible for planning, implementing those projects that actually brings development hazards. So issue, the challenge here is again enforcing or claiming or kind of claiming rights or the recognizing or kind of legal enforcement of the entitlements of right holders, imposing concrete responsibilities or obligations on the actors or institutions who are actually responsible for those kind of development hazards. This is another example. I didn't, find proper picture for this project, but so hopefully you can find online if you search about it. So another bridge project that was kind of designed to connect the eastern and the western part of the country, Bangladesh, through the construction, operation, maintenance of a bridge over the Jamuna River. And the main plan or the idea behind constructing this bridge was to kind of bring or stimulate economic growth by facilitating cross-river transport of passengers, freight, and transmission of power. So you can see that the project was planned or initiated with a clear focus in mind, and that is the interest, the economic interest, economic growth, economic development. It was a joint project of a number of international, national governments and institutions. So you can see a number of other country governments were also involved. Number of number of international institutions were involved. Even an UN organ, UNDP, was involved. The government of Japan and the UK government's overseas development administration was involved. The project constitutes a bridge, a 4.8 kilometer long and 18.5 meters wide across the Jamuna River, with a foundation to carry a railway and being capable of supporting an electric interconnector, a gas pipeline, a telecommunication activities. The construction of the bridge actually increased the water level in the river. And because of this water level increase due to the construction of the bridge, almost 70,000 indigenous population who lived and derived their income from the chars, means an island, a small island. That is the meaning of chars. And they lost their livelihood because of the water level increase due to the construction of the bridge. Unfortunately, the indigenous population who were living in the chars in the small island were also known as Chor people, mean the island people, were not enlisted in the compensation plan of the project, and the project has placed them in a vulnerable position with respect to their access to cultivate their food. So they kind of left the project actually left them a loss of livelihood because they were not able to cultivate their land because of the increase in the water level, and therefore once the water level increased, that kind of flooded their um, um, agricultural land. And now the Jamuna Char Integrated Development Project, a non-governmental organization, submitted a request for inspection to the World Bank's inspection panel, mentioning that threat of food insecurity and the extinction of the people due to their expropriated from their ancestral land and the inability to produce the agricultural products. In the request, it was also mentioned the closure of the water channel in order to build the bridge caused a rise in water level, which would mean that the houses and lands would be submerged under the water or immersed in the water. The request also alleged that funding of the projects failed to include this indigenous population within the process of planning of the planning stage or the development process or the planning process, designing, implementing, and also there was no plan for resettlement and environmental measures. After conducting a field visit, the World Bank Inspection Panel confirmed damage caused by the construction process and the impact on the food insecurity of the indigenous population. The panel also detected the problem of the lack of participation from the indigenous population in the development process, in the planning, in the implementation. The management, though the management of the government authority, which actually are the specific authorities who are actually managing the project, they completely rejected the assessment conducted by the World Bank's inspection panel. And by arguing that the harm experienced by the indigenous population could not be identified because the final location of the bridge has not yet been determined, not yet been decided. So again, you can see how mega projects or construction projects or dam projects can actually lead to development hazards because in the planning process there was no participation, there is no participatory process of development. So the people were never invited. Those people who are going to be affected, or those who are affected, those whose livelihood is affected by the project were never kind of invited or never brought within the development process. Again, it also brings into view the challenges we are facing in terms of making um, the declaration or making the right to development or the development as a human right a reality, because in most cases or in many cases, authorities, the state authorities, the government simply ignore the rights or the entitlements or the processes or the very idea of development as a process or the participatory nature of development has completely been ignored in this kind of project. So again, these are the challenges we are facing in terms of making the right to development a reality. Or we can say that the right to development or the declaration on the right to development simply remains an utopian ideal or something, a rhetorical device, a rhetorical idea that cannot be actually realized, cannot be actually um, taken into consideration in terms of making the development as a human right a reality. So that's where I stop. I think we are almost over the time. So yeah, I think we can just discuss if we have few questions or any questions, and then can wrap up
Oke,
the
baik.
session.
Baik, kita lanjut ke sesi tanya jawab. We move to the question section, sir. Oke, ada pertanyaan? Silahkan, satu pertanyaan. Silahkan raise hands atau ya di kolom chat juga boleh. Kita akan menunggu sampai ada satu pertanyaan ya. Karena sesi hari ini sesi terakhir merangkum seluruhnya. Di hari pertama ada pertanyaan dari Jose mengenai keterlibatan para pihak apakah dapat meningkatkan pembangunan yang lebih baik. Ternyata dijawab pada hari ini berdasarkan beberapa contoh tadi bahwa ketika masyarakat justru tidak berperan dan pasif, tidak dilibatkan, malah akan menjadi malapetaka yang lebih besar lagi. Kemudian di hari kedua kemarin ada pertanyaan dari Mawar mengenai persamaan persepsi mengenai HAM dalam konteks pembangunan. Yang ternyata hari ini juga kita ketahui bahwasanya memang sengaja dibuka gitu pemahamannya mengenai hak asasi manusia tadi, Human Rights RTD, Right to Develop, untuk mengakomodir gitu, untuk mengakomodir ruang-ruang bagi negara untuk memperhatikan budayanya, kearifan lokalnya, arah pembangunan nasionalnya gitu. Jadi kita tunggu satu pertanyaan pamungkas. Silahkan kalau ada yang mau bertanya raise hand atau di kolom chat. Ya. Atau kalau memang udah cukup jelas, bisa respon juga. Cukup jelas Kak, cukup jelas Pak gitu. Jangan hening saja. Gimana? Ada yang mau bertanya? Does anyone have any question or it's already enough for today?
Yeah.
Perhaps the examples that you provide makes them thinking more and more and digging about the right to development, the hazard. Perhaps it's just awakening for them to see
Right.
how
Okay.
bad it is to
Yeah,
be
right.
ignorant. It seems because I understand sometimes the development seems too far away, especially when we live in the city like Medan in Sumatera Utara is practical city that
Mhm.
a bit far from relocated, something like that. So in that order, perhaps we can just sum up.
Yeah, sure. So in that case, we can sum up. Yeah. So
Mm.
I have nothing else to say because I think I have discussed or talked enough the last 3 days. So I think it's kind of to you, completely to you.
Yes, sir. There is no word describing how gratitude I am to have you as the guest lecturer. This is my very first time actually to be a host to a guest lecture and to have you, the one that very, very cooperative and not so demanding, is kind of a blessing for me actually.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes. Kalau ini betul udah nggak ada pertanyaan lagi. Kalau memang udah nggak ada, ya udah kita cukupkan aja ya. Thank you so much, Dr. Mizanur, for the 3 days. Perhaps it's 6 hours
Yeah.
in total. Yeah,
Right.
thank you so much for sharing the knowledge, for making us understand more about RTD. And honestly, for me, the UNDRD is also a new thing. So thank you for introduce that to us. I believe the document is something new as well for the students. So thank you. I hope we can arrange any collaborative event again in the future. As I
Sure.
mentioned earlier about MOU and MOA, I will specifically contact you again for
Sure.
things. Perhaps after we finish the administrative things towards the guest lecture.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. I would very much, would be interested to, have more interaction, more whatever way you want to kind of engage. I mean, in terms of, we are taking sessions in another topic or, something in a probably different subject because I deal with, other subjects as well, like, international trade law, investment law. So those are my areas of interest. And I also kind of teach or taught those subjects before. So anything that you think might be suitable for me, either in the form of taking seminars or some sessions, or probably, even kind of probably visiting the university, the USCU, for other events or organizing any kind of joint seminars. I'd be very much interested and welcome those initiatives or proposals. So yeah, thank you so much.
All right, sir. Then our guest lecture is practically wrap up. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest. I hope this session will be something beneficial for you, something awakening, and perhaps you can write it more deeper on your scriptsy, perhaps. And yeah, because it's something essential, but not so many person have very specific ideologies or perhaps wonder about it. So if you are the chosen one, like Dr. Mizanur, who have specifically interest about the UNDRD, please write it on and on to gain more kesadaran, to gain more awareness from everyone else.
Okay, so one more thing, Annisa, is that I think I shared the first PPTs, the first sessions PPTs, and so if you want me to share the other two PPTs, means yesterday's and today's PPTs, so then I can obviously share the PPTs, and then if you want to share the PPTs with the students, they can obviously look into the PPTs more closely. And think about some of the ideas, some of the arguments, or some of the understanding I was trying to kind of provide. Because sometimes 1.5 hour probably sometimes difficult because it is something very new for them, or probably they never they are not familiar, not aware of this very specific idea of development as a human right or right to development. So as they probably know, I think they're studying human rights law. I am kind of assuming that they are studying the subject human rights law, so they can look into this topic more detail, and they probably hopefully they might find it more interesting, because maybe in 1.5 hours is too much for them. Kind of difficult for them to understand. But once they look into the PPTs more in their own time, they might become more interested and think about it more. So I would be happy to share the PPTs, and you can also share the PPTs with them, so that they can also think about when they're studying or reading human rights in their university subject. They can obviously think about development as a human right, as a topic, a right to development or development as a human right. A topic in the course of in the human rights a study, or in the human rights course. That would I'd be very happy to kind of provide.
Yes, sir. Actually, there is one person, commander of the class, I think, who already contacted me from the very first session, that asking for your PPTs and for the recording session. Luckily, the session is live stream from YouTube, so they can always see it. Perhaps in the future years, when they already want to write about the RTD, and they can see the videos again and put some insight to their paper on the future.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll share the PPTs after maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow, once I have some time, and then I can send the PPTs to you. No problem.
It's okay, sir. Via WhatsApp, still okay. I can forward it to them.
Sure. Okay then.
Okay,
so
then.
I just last word is thanks for joining today, or those who have joined all the 3 sessions. I hope you enjoyed, even if you sometimes the English language might be a barrier for many of you. Many of you probably were unable to kind of completely follow up with the language, with my discussion, with my arguments. So I entirely understand that language is a big barrier in many places. Even the place I am here in Baghdad, students are also, are not very good in English. They also struggle in terms of understanding English. But obviously, you just need to, put more effort in terms of making reading the language, or understanding the language. So thank you in that sense. I think I kind of really appreciate that those of you joined all the 3 sessions, attended all the 3 sessions, given your time in terms of listening to the class. I hope that I didn't bore, I didn't make all of you feel sleepy, or make all of you feel bored with all this all the arguments, all this discussion. Hope at least some at least probably some of the things you might have enjoyed, or at least you might have learned something, even if it is just simply a little bit of learning. I think that is again some kind of something that makes me feel happy about it. Okay, so thanks again once again.
Yes, sir, obviously. So let's sum it up, everyone. Good night. Have a wonderful day tomorrow. Yeah, we have still so much to do, so much to think, so much to improve. Official, one of it is our communication skills in English. Ya, karena sudah terasa ya bagi kita semua betapa beruntungnya kalau kita bisa berkomunikasi dalam bahasa Inggris dengan baik gitu. Salah satunya adalah banyak referensi bahan yang lebih bagus lagi, banyak juga bisa diskusi dengan orang-orang hebat lainnya gitu. Jadi mulailah belajar bahasa Inggris ya adik-adik, masih semester muda semua kan ini rata-rata, jadi tidak ada kata terlambat untuk belajar. Saya pribadi pun mulai melancarkan bahasa Inggris di S1, jadi ini memang the right moment to improve your English skill. And perhaps this one could be your debut to another awakening moment, awakening spot in English and in RTD. Okay, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, thank you, everyone. Please leave the room. We already finished the 3 session with Dr. Mizanur. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mulai.